You are listening to Reddit to Speech Stories. Welcome back, viewers, ladies, gentlemen, non-binaries, and anyone with ears or other sound detection organs. Hope you enjoy. We are continuing with Doom Guy Isekai by Angry Spider.
Chapter 50, 40,000 Doom. The soldier could smell smoke. It was a very specific type of smoke. It wasn't the scent of a campfire, which usually had some kind of spiced meat drifting along with the breeze. It wasn't the scent of burning corpses, another smell he was quite familiar with. No, this was the smell of a farmhouse that had been very deliberately doused in some kind of inflammant and then torched. Daisy's nose twitched. What is that? Tagrel took a deep breath. Wheat, I'd say. Maybe a few cows. He turned to the soldier. Do you think it's who we're looking for? The soldier summoned his beloved shotgun, and Tagrel nodded understandingly. To summarize, you want me and Daisy to stay back here with Isabel and let you relax a bit by taking on whoever did this on your own. Looking up, he discovered both Daisy and the soldier staring at him, and put his hands up defensively. Hey, when your life depends on reading moods, you get good at it. The soldier shook his head and started heading out. As irritating as it was to admit it, Tagrel was indeed correct. The incident with Sloth had left him feeling angry at himself, and something else needed to pay for it. Slinging her gun over her shoulder, Daisy hopped on Isabel's back and crossed her legs, reaching for an apple. Okay, you do you. We'll be here when you're done. A few minutes later, the soldier was trekking through fields of tall corn, weapon at the ready. He heard something and felt it through the ground a moment later, the rumble of a gun. Not one of the soldier's guns, no. This one was different. He broke into a run and burst out onto a strange, albeit oddly familiar, scene. A massive man decked in yellow and red armor was blasting his weapon at a remarkably agile man dressed like a farmer. The farmer was darting across the ground, summoning demons who appeared and died as quickly as he could bring them up. He was shouting. Retirement. The Empire won't take me alive. The soldier was unsure who had attacked who first. It didn't matter. The farmer was summoning demons, and the soldier was on a mission to end them. Swapping his shotgun for a rocket launcher, he sent a missile careening in the farmer's direction, and the landscape was reduced to a charred crater a second later. Turning to face him, the armored man roared, "What kind of heavy weapon is that? Give it to me." He paced towards the soldier, one hand outstretched. The soldier realized that the armored man wanted his weapon, which ranked high on his list of annoyances, and sprinted forward. He couldn't see past the strange helmet the man had on, but he didn't need to see the man's face to tell he was ready to fight. Raising his gun, the man fired, and a bolt of lead slammed into the soldier's gut. Blood of thy enemies absorbed the entire hit, not counting the shockwave produced by the impact, and the soldier straight-kicked the man in the chest. The ground cracked as the man bent his knees, sliding backward as his boots dug twin trenches in the dirt. Heretic. He lifted his gun again and kept firing. The soldier ignored the hits, pulling his shotgun out and aiming for the man's head. The blast that erupted from the shotgun's end was big enough to scorch the corn around them in a massive radius, and the flaming farmhouse collapsed. The man somehow took the hit on his shoulder and stomped forward, pulling some kind of chainsaw forward/sword combination out of nowhere. The soldier immediately wanted one. For now, he had his own chainsaw, and he pulled it out with a manic grin. Chainsword met chainsaw with a grinding screech of metal, and they struggled for a moment. The soldier was surprised to find that he was struggling. Whatever this man was, he was strong. Forcing both weapons to the side, the soldier stomped forward and head-butted the man. 3 rapid hits so fast it was impossible to tell the sounds apart. The man shook the impact off and smashed his own helmet into the soldier's. With a motion fueled by brute force, the soldier yanked his chainsaw back, and the chain snapped. He stared in shock at the suddenly useless weapon as the man danced backward, his chainsaw raised. Nope, the soldier wasn't doing that anymore. He yanked out the super shotgun and fired. The ground jumped and the ruined farmhouse was blown away by the blast, but the man somehow dodged, diving forward and coming up in a roll. Stepping sideways, he snapped an armored hand out and seized the super shotgun. "Give me your gun." The soldier's eyes narrowed behind his helmet. He was having fun. He let go of the super shotgun and summoned another one. The man contrived to look confused, even though his face was obscured. It didn't seem to be enough confusion to stop him from shooting the soldier in the chest. The soldier was knocked head over heels and felt a rib crack. He rejoiced in the pain, even though his vision was already clouding in red as long-suppressed fury was unleashed from deep within him. A hand slammed into the ground and he swung himself downward, boots crashing into the ground with enough force to send chunks of rock flying into the air. Raising his hands, he showed the man the chain gun he was holding, spinning the barrels up. The man raised his newly obtained super shotgun again, preparing to fire. The soldier never gave him the chance, unloading several 100 pounds of lead a second into the man's armor as he walked forward, laughing like a madman. Would he finally get to fight someone on even ground? Daisy rubbed the apple on her pant leg, examined it, and took a bite. Glancing over at Tagrel, she said thoughtfully, "Do you think we should help?" Tagrel shrugged. "It's Doom. He can handle it." The trees bent backward under a sudden blast of air, the immediately recognizable sound of Doom's fight-ending weapon pushing the gale onward. Tagrel pointed in the direction it had come from. "See. He's fine." The blast came again a moment later, and then again. A bone-rattling thud emanated from the horizon as something caused a minor earthquake. Daisy frowned. Has he ever used it that many times? Tagrel squinted in the direction Doom had gone in, noting the thick plume of black smoke. "No, I don't think so. Maybe you're right. I'll go." The sky lit up green as Doom's trump card was fired, and the clouds were blown out of the sky. Isabel hunched, making sure Daisy was guarded from the resulting shockwave that leveled trees and pulverized rocks. Even Tagrel had to lean forward, gritting his teeth and putting a hand in front of him. As the minutes passed and no sound came from the battle, Tagrel turned to Daisy. "Yeah, it's dead now, whatever it is." Daisy wasn't looking at him. She was pointing over his shoulder. "Look." He turned around. Doom was approaching them, several already mending dents in his armor visible even from this distance. Another man, one even taller than Doom, accompanied him. He was dressed in yellow and red armor, and a good portion of his helmet was missing. It looked as though his left arm had been blown off and then regrown, based on the lack of armor or clothing on it. He shouted, and from 1,000 feet away, was still loud enough that Daisy had to cover her ears. "I have battled your champion and found the combat invigorating. I shall come with you, so long as we shall slay heretics." Tagrel put 2 fingers to the bridge of his nose. "Oh, great. They're multiplying."
Crossover Part 2, I guess. Petty opened his eyes, happy he'd been allowed to say bye to Lula. She'd been very confused, waving her little legs around and shouting. Oh wait, he was falling. This was not his first time falling out of the sky. In fact, he'd been much higher up the last time. The wind whipping through his fur and pulling drool out of his mouth tasted different than the stuff back home. Shaking his head, he rotated to check on the other people hurtling at the green far below. One of them was a human that smelled like being angry, but he didn't look like he was worried about his predicament. Maybe it was because he was wearing so much armor. Flipping over, Petty glanced between his back paws, trying not to roll all the way, and saw the nice person who had not yet confirmed that he wasn't a crab tumbling through the air, screaming. He had a lot of hard bits and sharp bits, but he was the only one who gave Petty pats, so he was Petty's favorite so far. His face had opened up like a flower so he could scream louder, which seemed like a very helpful ability to have. Petty swam through the air towards him and grabbed onto his black shell with his teeth, being very careful not to punch through. He was still getting the hang of his own strength, even though he'd had it for a few weeks by now. With a determined thought, he started floating, and their momentum halted abruptly. The crabman stopped screaming after a moment, feeling around. What, Petty? How are you doing that? Flight is really rare. Petty beamed from ear to ear. Thank you. I like flying, but Lula he froze as he realized he'd dropped the crabman in order to talk, and he looked down to see the crabman screaming once again. Aiming himself, Petty launched himself downward, grabbed onto the crabman's shell on the way down, flipped over, and crashed into the ground with enough force to make a crater. A second later, the crabman landed on Petty, bounced off his soft fur, and slammed into a tree with a sound that made Petty wince. Petty started walking towards him, but paused. Was he forgetting something? He sat down and scratched his ear with a hind paw, frowning as he thought about it. Angry armor man, nice crab man, right. Human child who smelled weird. Where'd he go? Something clamped onto his back, falling with immense speed and rolling off with a startled oof of displaced air. Petty gazed wide-eyed at the small human in front of him, and he slowly sat up with a wince. Hello, Petty. I seem to have broken a rib. Is there any chance you possess some kind of healing ability? Petty gave him a huge lick across the face in reply, and the weirdest smile Petty had ever seen crossed the child's face. It was like he hated himself for enjoying it. After a second of facial wrestling, the young boy worked the expression off. Impressive emotional manipulation. How can it be applied to other, Standing up, he patted himself down and then looked at Petty, eyes narrowed. Did you lick me in an attempt to better yourself in my view and happen to heal me as well, or were you trying to heal me, and the burst of happiness was a side effect? Moreover, is it simply the transference of your innate glee to others or is it an artificially induced happiness? His face darkened, and Petty kind of wanted to give him another lick. If only that paladin spawn excuse for a spider hadn't put limitations on me. I'd love to examine you with more depth. The armored person sat up from where he'd landed. He'd hit a tree on his way down, but instead of falling through the branches, he'd gone through the main trunk and pulverized it from top to bottom. Even as Petty watched, the splintered remainder toppled over. Petty scratched his ear happily. These were such interesting people. Bane stared up at the brilliant blue sky, breathing hard. He'd been raised under a city, not over it. Heights were not his strong suit. Not for the last time, he wished Nama was here to help. His dad definitely wouldn't have fit in the small room they'd entered in, but the Kidger centipede could beat anything. He rolled over, glancing at the glowing golden retriever furiously licking Ugus. Well, anything in their universe. Petty hadn't even appeared to notice Bane's weight and managed to keep flying at the same time. He had immense innocent charm, was relaxing just to look at, and had powers even Eddie wasn't capable of describing. He'd make a better hero than you. Bane shook the thought away. He'd dealt with more than his fair share of psychological issues. He'd earned his place among the heroes of his home city fair and square, and he'd defended it more than once. Petty probably had his own problems to deal with, much the same as everyone in existence. Rolling all of his shoulders, Bane checked himself over and found no chinks or cracks in his carapace. Sure, they'd heal fast enough, but he wanted to be in top condition for the mission to save the multiverse. At least, that's what he was calling it in his mind. He couldn't wait to bring news about it back home. Hello might have saved the city a few times. Boom Mike could blast himself halfway across the city by the time Bane realized he'd forgotten donuts. Stitches was probably unkillable. But could any of them say that they'd saved an entire multiverse? Now that he thought about it, he wasn't totally sure. Hello had been number one for a pretty long time. Doom extricated himself from the demolished tree he'd landed in and promptly summoned a gun bigger than Bane's arm, and the monster frowned. Petty was plenty heroic and Ugus reminded Bane of Nama's sheddings, but Doom gave Bane strange vibes. He felt like the armored soldier was ready, willing, and eager to kill any and everything at a moment's notice. Despite what Eddie said about him, Bane didn't believe he could be anything except a villain. His armor was covered in blood and he used guns. Not small ones, either. Even if the gigantic shotgun cradled in Doom's arms shot tranquilizers, anybody shot by them would overdose instantly. And Bane had a feeling Doom wasn't using tranquilizers. He flexed his claws worriedly, getting the pops out of his back. He was going to have to keep an eye on him. Doom was going to have to keep an eye on Bane. He had been battling everything that had so much as looked at him sideways for over a decade. The world he'd been shunted to had only provided more targets, and he'd taken great pleasure in gunning those down as well. He'd even found a new rabbit. But Bane? Bane was a monster. Those tended to attack Doom at some point, and Doom was not in the mood to be attacked. Granted, it'd give him some short-lived therapy as he pounded the shell off him, but he really wanted to get back to his rabbit and the underworld helpfully located nearby. There was ripping and tearing that needed to be done. Shaking his helmet, Doom examined the map located at the top of his helmet directing him northwest. It hadn't been there before, but if that self-proclaimed spider had written universes into existence, it stood to reason he could fiddle with Doom's armor a bit. He wasn't sure how to feel about that. On one hand, someone was messing with his extremely powerful and incomparably handy power armor. On the other, that same someone was perfectly capable of giving him any gun that had ever existed along with a few Doom had only dreamed of, and was refusing to do so. Really, he was angry at him either way. He was satisfied with that conclusion. Doom bore anger towards pretty much everything with a pulse, aside from his beloved rabbit. Checking to make sure the others weren't watching him, the creepy child was, he removed the bazookat from his inventory. It resembled an extended tube with exposed wires sticking out of it at various points, most of them plugged into a gently glowing green power source and the barrel. The end of the gun was shaped like a smiling calico cat, the mouth serving as the barrel and two disconnected paws for the foregrip and trigger handle. It was without a doubt the strangest and most unreliable-looking gun Doom had ever seen, and he'd once used a skull as a flamethrower. Putting it back in his inventory, he swapped it out for a shotgun and smiled in his helmet. Nothing was quite so comforting as a gun in one's hands. His HUD picked up a sound and he raised an eyebrow. Something was coming. He made a decision quickly. He didn't know if any of the others had the PG perk, and he didn't want to stick around and find out. If the enemy coming towards them was big, and he didn't really care whether it was actually an enemy or not, he wanted to get its guts outside of it. A lot of weird stuff had happened in the past 10 minutes and he needed to distress. Leaving the others behind and completely ignoring Bane's shout for him to wait, Doom sprinted forward. He didn't bother with trying to go around the trees in his path, it was their fault if they happened to grow in front of him. The sound coming from ahead grew louder, and he grinned. This was going to be fun. Argus was confused on a number of levels. A lot of extremely unusual things were going on and had been going on for the past 10 minutes and he still had very little concrete idea as to what was going on. He definitely missed thesis and theory. Their combined attack power would have been invaluable in any situation, but he was a dungeon. He could improvise, adapt, and overcome. Argus frowned. That thought had seemed artificial. Shaking it away, he considered the circumstances. Bane was some sort of beetle/humanoid mutant. He seemed quite powerful, although he possessed no mana Argus could detect. He had morals, which were really only useful when people wanted to trick other people, so Argus suspected he could handle him. Next came Doom. Wherever the armored human had gone, he had left them behind. A distinct aura of unequaled bloodlust and wrath followed him wherever he went. It made Argus wish he could enthrall the man, but he had a feeling it wouldn't work. A remarkable amount of mana came off of him, but it stank of rotting flesh and explosives. Argus glanced at Petty out of the corner of his eye. The dog was bouncing after Bane as the monster tried to follow Doom, a wide smile on Petty's oblivious face. To a normal man, he appeared as a normal dog. Uga saw him for what he really was the moment he used his manovision. An implacable and unstoppable paragon in the form of a dog, possessing incomparable power. He radiated mana like a star, to the point where Ugas could barely even look at him through the intensity. It made tears well up and dried his eyeballs. Rubbing his eyes, Ugas blinked until the dryness went away. Bane was a hopeless optimist believing in the innate goodness of humanity. He was strong but manageable. Doom was strange. In terms of psychology, he was the second most dangerous in the group, next to Ugas himself. Petty was by far the greatest threat to the mission. Theoretically speaking, an artifact in the style of the one Eddie had lost would be more powerful than any gun conceivable, especially if that gun was the one he'd spied Doom handling. It was ridiculous thought that such an absurd weapon could mete out any level of destruction, regardless of what Eddie claimed. Stories of nemesis and pet cats were moot points to the unassailable reality of hard facts. This group was a walking bomb with a lit fuse. Ugas planned to aim it. End of story. This is where the story stopped. We will continue with other stories tomorrow. If you enjoyed, like, subscribe, click the bell so you don't miss any episode and do all the other YouTube stuff. Visit and support the author. All the relevant links are in the doobly-doo, and comment your opinions, good or bad. And I'll see you next time. And as usual, have a wonderful day.